Namaskaram. Friday, April 9th, 2021, episode number 138 of Daily Global Insights by Sri and Sri. Here are the main points. Uttarakhand government reverses its stand and gives up the control of the 51 temples in the state. Unaccompanied children jumped the Mexico-US border at a record rate in March 2021. Protests in Iran over the 25-year deal that its government has signed with China. New Zealand announces a temporary ban on flyers from India as the cases mount, and mass vaccine center in Colorado shut down after adverse reactions reported to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. In the main news, in United States news, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and his team create a $2 billion fund to provide undocumented with relief. New York is raising taxes for millionaires, and will other states follow suit? What are your thoughts, sir? New York sometimes does lead, but sometimes in the wrong direction.
New York is, in this particular instance, is probably going the wrong way. Will the other states? We live in a competitive, federal structure here. So I just don't see. Maybe some states which have got bad balance sheets, liberal states, they may raise taxes. I just do not see conservative states raising taxes. This $2 billion fund to fund these people. I think it's not going to go very well.
And in the border crisis, migrant apprehensions, that is the arrests, surged by 450%. Unaccompanied minors record high as crisis reaches epic proportions. And there is now there are many videos now showing unaccompanied children jumping the border at places where there is no water. It's very hazardous on the American side, but still it is not deterring them from jumping across. Sir, your thoughts? This thing must stop now. Whatever madness that the government had thought about, this needs to be undone right away.
Indeed, sir. I think that the number that the CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, is alluding to is more than 170,000 just in the month of March. So the numbers have reached epic proportions, and lots of these people are kids. And we talked about the bus model of putting them into the buses, putting them into the army centers, putting them into the buses, and moving them into Washington D.C., New York, Minnesota, even Florida, Miami. So you see that. I think that there seems to be an internal battle between the various factions within democratic groups. But thus far, there seems to be kind of no let-up. Something unusual announced last night, that the Peruvian, government announced that there's no vaccines in Peru. So please go to United States and get vaccinated, because you'll get vaccines. So it's a country. So I think we're just going to have this is going to be an unending search, because there's no let-up. And there is nobody wanting to let up unless the Supreme Court intervenes.
And in other news, GOP leader Kevin McCarthy wants the FBI-CIA terrorism briefing to include Vice President Kamala Harris. And in other associated news, Democrat Ilhan Omar blasts Biden and says it's a shameful plan to continue the border wall construction. Now we are beginning to see schisms develop inside the Democratic Party. We've been telling you how the progressives have been trying to run away with the government's agenda. Now the government perhaps is pushing back. There is also other news that the DHS secretary is the one really looking at the immigrant crisis, and Vice President Kamala Harris is just there in name only. She is not really doing any hands-on involvement in this. There has been, they published her schedule for the last 10 days ever since the announcement was made, and showed how she never got even close to the border wall. So there is some palace intrigues going on. Your thoughts, sir?
Anyway, I think that the best way to describe Kamala Harris is, she's kind of the ornamental queen vice president, which is, namely, she would like to call she's presidential. So, in fact, some of the publications, mainstream media, had put double quotes, President Harris. That's what she is, right? Ruffle the feathers, show off. She was tasked with the border issue. She's not there. She disappeared for 14 days. Nobody knows where she kind of went. So you have that specific issue. And then so Kevin McCarthy is saying, when you do the FBI and CIA briefing on the terrorists, we want Harris in the meetings. She is voting on Senate in some of the decisions. We want her to make a statement as to what her position is. Right? And she's going to be, again, being a lawyer, being waffly, right? So, but Kevin is trying to force them to bring her on board. And Ilhan is not keeping quiet, and she's basically saying, no border wall, no this, not, and so on. So, as you rightly point out, we have a good confusion. What I call as the three different legs. You have the vice president, you have a confusion. Then you have the progressives, you have a confusion. Then you have these daily Gaffes of the White House press secretary or the White House, the correspondent, the White House reporter, making kind of statements which seems to be inconsistent between one and the other. So there is clearly, it's very visible. There's no leadership which is creating a cohesive story. As you rightly pointed out, Mr. Mayorkas is running it, and basically the House and the House Republicans and Senate Republicans are gunning for his head, which is to say he's single-handedly accountable for this specific mess. And he was briefed and he was warned that this was a crisis, but they basically chose to ignore the Trump warnings.
And I think the United States government needs to come out and give a status update on all the cases that are pending against Ilhan Omar. This lady has, depending on who you talk to, has a lot of questionable things in her past, and these have not been really resolved. I think the government owes it to the American people where the status of all these things are. If there are nothing there, fine. Go ahead and tell that there is nothing, that she is here legally. There is no problem with her, sibling marriage, whatever the thing is being talked about. If that is not, just come out and say what this is. Because this is becoming too big, and clearly Madam Nancy Pelosi does not seem to have control over her troops. This is not the Iron Lady I know, sir. I'm really, really concerned.
Sir, I think you're making some excellent observations. We will confirm these numbers, but many of these progressives come and get elected from neighborhoods where there is an asymmetric ethnographic shift of the ethnicity of people. So let us take Ilhan Omar. She's guaranteed, with 60-70% of a specific segment of people who vote for her. Pramila Jayapal, something similar. AOC, something similar. So they have established themselves, and to give legitimacy by a focused, concentrated kind of segment of population. It begs the question, how legitimate and how objective the policy making is when such is the framework of getting yourself elected. And that is the repercussions that we are facing right now.
And in other news, entrepreneur Peter Thiel says woke big tech companies don't consider themselves as American companies. He's taking direct aim at, I think, some of the social media companies which are seen to be more woke friendly. I'm not sure. He'll have to explain what it is, but that is how I see it. I don't know what your thoughts are, sir.
Well, I think he has targeted not just social media. It includes Apple. It probably includes Delta, it probably includes Coke, it includes, a whole bunch of kind of companies where they're saying that, right in the middle of a pandemic, they're investing in China. Right in the middle of a kind of national issue around many challenges, they seem to be taking an anti-kind of position. So he's making his point, which is effectively to state, these guys are, seem to reflect the sentiments of the woke type of people. And how objective and how relevant it is in terms of the preserving the global order. I mean, I think Jamie Dimon was very right we touched on that yesterday in his letter, where he addressed as to what some of the things that United States is about. So they have to, all these, my advice input to them is please read Jamie Dimon's letter, and before you recalibrate your policy decisions would be my kind of statement to these woke companies.
And former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says that no American should participate in the 2022 Beijing Genocide Olympics. He's using the word genocide now. This is becoming more and more part of the mainstream. There's also other news that we are going to talk about, which talks about the Uyghur genocide that the Chinese are doing. They're trying to Hanify the entire country. We'll talk more about that. Sir, any thoughts on this?
I think that this is again another issue which is going back and forward. If you recall, the State Department initially walked itself away. Then it said it'll work with the allies. There's still lack of clarity as to what it is. China has issued an ultimatum, which is effectively to state that hey, if United States kind of boycotts, it will face kind of punitory kind of consequences. So the question, therefore, is again, there is no, where is Antony Blinken? Mike Pompeo is the former state secretary of state. So where's Antony Blinken? What's his statement? The deputy secretary of state and the secretary of state are supposed to issue a statement on this type of matter on a policy. Similarly, Mr. Kurt Campbell, who has been given the Asia brief, right? So he's the special kind of representative. He should be making a statement around that, not this Rambo jumbo kind of statements that kind of come out from the press secretary. And then you have Mike Pompeo standing up and saying, we should be boycotting. A number of countries have raised this issue that the 2022 Olympics needs to be boycotted because the reason is, China is in a kind of a renegade situation.
And President Biden announces executive action to combat public health crisis of gun violence, even as there was another instance of violence yesterday in the state of Texas. And Biden commits yet another gaffe. Biden falsely claims that manufacturers cannot be sued. I think he's just talking about vaccines, sir. I can't imagine that he's that naive.
Sir, no, sir, gun manufacturers, and then he corrected himself, and he didn't know the law. The gun manufacturers can be sued. So that is part of the kind of the extension. So I think that, look, I think as we have discussed enough on Biden and his kind of health. So this they call it as the word that is used is public health crisis is what is causing all these gun issues. Okay, so therefore they call it as the executive orders to combat public health crisis. So while they do this, Republican states one after the other are passing laws which counters this. One of the states passed a law, I think it's either Iowa or Kansas, I don't remember which one, but one of them passed a law where they said they can carry gun without permission, they can acquire gun without permission. So they have restored or reinstated or they have reset and basically saying, we don't accept what these guys are saying. So quite a few of these states are passing legislation, resting the control. So then it becomes, who can enforce it? If you are the governor and the government in power, you have to enforce it. So you're going to have this conflict back again. So executive orders is not a right tool because there is no debate in the House and Senate. Biden doesn't want debate in the House or Senate. He just wants to run things from his office and keep on signing orders and occasionally pop up and give statements and then contradict himself.
Well, he will say, well, who started this trend? Anyway, this finger pointing will go on. Sir, this is a very major breaking news. Russia review. Now, the Biden administration says that there was Russian interference in elections and they are mulling sanctions and expulsions of Russian intelligence officers. Has it already happened, sir?
Not yet, but I think that they are contemplating. The review has been complete. They have found out through this, FBI-CIA kind of investigations. There was that solar wind company kind of an attack. There's also other forms of interference that they have assessed based on their investigations. So they believe that the appropriate action is not only sanctions, but also to expel the intelligence officers who generally are in the Washington, D.C. Russian embassy. So another activity that is ready to explode.
And the foreign minister of Russia, Lavrov, says U.S. policy on Russia is plain dumb and ineffective. This sounds like standard communist rhetoric. Russia military starts massive combat readiness and inspection as Ukraine tensions soar. So, sir, now the border across Ukraine, I think we've been talking about this for a while now, is because of the water denial to Crimea. Now, Russian foreign minister is shooting his mouth off, in my opinion, because how can they say what U.S. policies is? We are telling our policies are messed up, which is probably the truth. But what is exactly? See, sometimes you have to read between the lines and look under the carpet. What are your thoughts about all this, sir?
Uh, my thoughts, I think that I just want to reaffirm and give credit to PGurus. The water issue in Crimea is something that mainstream media is not reporting. That's
Yes, yes.
PGurus kind of assessment and reporting, right? So which is being communicated to the public. But basically, the build-up that is going on, state of preparedness, all happening within the Russian border, inside Russian territory, but close to Ukraine. Seems to be a lot of ruffling and rhetoric that is going on. Whether it is going to invade Ukraine and teach them a lesson is something that we don't know. But clearly, Russia cannot afford a Ukrainian war. So this may remain a rhetoric, and it may remain this political game that is going on between these three nations: United States, Russia, as well as China, in terms of jockeying for kind of positions. So you do more investigation of me, I'll create more trouble for you. You do more investigation of me, I'll give more trouble for you. That seems to be the scenario. Also remember that Biden administration historically has been understood to be closer to the Ukrainian kind of administration. So it is quite conceivable, there are a few things kind of rambling around that aspect.
And in breaking news, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, dies at the age of 99. More details are awaited. We will touch upon this in our Monday segment in more detail. In the continued China-Iran saga, Iran is not for sale. Get out. Now Iran's population is protesting over the 25-year deal that the government of Iran has signed with China, sir.
I think what you're seeing here is historically there's always this disconnect between the religious regime, the military. Generally, the religious and the military regime seem to align, and then the common people. I think the common people, are more kind of business, industrious, entrepreneurial. They want to kind of get on with the life. And actually, in fact, there was even protest in DC by Iranian people to make Iran a democracy, more than all these kinds of rumbling that is going on around this nuclear deal. So what you're seeing here is people coming and saying, oh my God, are you going to bring the Chinese, and are they going to interfere with, we need freedom. We don't need China. China is not representative of a free enterprise and freedom. It is draconian in anything that it kind of does. So we are beginning to see the kind of the rumbles, develop from inside.
And the United States is prepared to lift sanctions inconsistent with Iran deal. Republican lawmakers slam Clubhouse for allowing foreign minister to promote propaganda. Who is Javed Zarif, sir?
Javed Zarif is the Iranian foreign minister. He is US educated, trained. He has deep connections into the Democratic Party. He probably has a good connections in the Republican Party as well. This Clubhouse is a group which offers kind of app and platform. So this fellow went on his rhetoric, you are leveraging this kind of platform. It's a publicity stunt. Remember that there is a very significant amount, this Council for Arab Islamic Relations and other types of groups have advocated and campaigned very heavily and invested in terms of support for democracy and change in policy from the Trump administration of holding Iran's feet to kind of fire. So this Javed Zarif making the statement has not kind of gone down very well amongst the Republicans.
And in other China news, Senate moves ahead with sweeping efforts to counter China. And the United States adds Chinese supercomputing companies also to the economic blacklist. Remember, Trump administration had put a lot of companies on blacklist. It also had delisted many companies from trading their stocks in the American exchanges. A lot of things had happened towards the end of the Trump presidency. Should we see this as a continuation of that, sir?
I think that it looks like it's much more a formalized structure rather than executive orders which Trump passed to kind of selectively go after different people. So I think the Republicans are taking a holistic picture now as a policy kind of a framework to combat the Democrats. Olympics is one of them. Human rights is one of them. The South China Sea incursions is one of them. Their interference into U.S. education, which we have covered, is another facet. Their companies' cybersecurity and cyber breaches is another, and potential kind of IP violations. So they're kind of looking at a holistic set of actions, which is to say, China is violating not in just one, but across a broad spectrum of ideas and broad spectrum of activities. So what is the holistic policy that we come up with to basically go after the Chinese? I think that's what you're beginning to see.
And Duerte faces China dilemma over militia in the South China Sea. We've been saying this, we talked about this a couple of days ago. So this rhetoric is now heating up even more, isn't it, sir?
Every day. So this is every day now, which is namely, especially I think that these guys have, they call them as the mercenaries or commandos rather than fishermen, who are now slowly, encroaching into the Philippine territory. So Duarte is now standing up and saying there's probably pressure from his own kind of fishermen, which is to say, hey, this is not just acceptable. The question is, will China toe the line, or will Philippines form partnership with the rest of the group, like Vietnam and Indonesia and Thailand and Japan and India and so on, to take a holistic kind of an approach? It's possible, because I think there seems to be something going on between India and Philippines as well as a partnership, and obviously between Philippines and to some extent Japan, and also United States as part of this bilateral, like the Korea bilateral, Japan bilateral, is considering a bilateral with Philippines.
And China hosts a 2-hour press conference in Australia to downplay the Uyghur abuses. This is the first time we're seeing a response from China on this issue, isn't it?
China, I think, is taking a very aggressive position. Australia is a very important partnership territory. There's a significant amount of mainland Chinese, especially in Sydney, Canberra kind of area, across the country. So what they're saying is that, remember, there was this China-Australia issue around Chinese, kind of ruffling the feathers of the Australians on human rights in Afghanistan, the Australian soldiers' abuse, and then the Australia kind of taking a strong position. And then if you recall, China, with about 5 or 6 African nations, including Russia, went to UN human rights in Geneva and complained against Australia, saying that Australia has been violating the kind of the human rights. So I think this rhetoric, and Australia doesn't care. And so now they have audiences, they have sympathizers similarly here we have in the United States, they have sympathizers in the political kind of theater in Australia. So they're making a grandstand in Australia. This may be an experiment, which is to say, because Australia is very far. So otherwise, why would you hold a 2-hour press briefing and make a comment about Uyghurs?
And in more China-related news, Lithuania becomes another country to lead the China-organized 17+1 and opens a trade office in Taiwan. Now this is beginning to be more than a trickle, sir.
It is. The 17+1, all these Eastern European nations, some of the African nations who were part of the group. So people are beginning to slowly kind of flee. Also, this, to some extent, the Biden's policy of overreach or reach into Eastern Europe is probably beginning to pay some kind of a dividends in terms of the consistency. And I think some of these Eastern European nations have also been impacted by the Sinopharm vaccine, which has not been fairly effective. And so there is a much more proactive approach that is going on in terms of leaving the shores of the Chinese kind of the entourage.
And in India-related news, New Zealand announces a temporary ban on flyers from India as the cases mount. Sridharji, with your permission, I want to put up a image now of how much of vaccine capacity India has, and what is this thing that is being talked about in the state of Maharashtra, where they are saying they are not getting enough vaccines. Sir, what I have now is a table where the central government of India has come out with a very cleared column by column. How many samples delivered, how many have been consumed, how many are remaining, how many are in pipeline. This is very, very detailed, and I'm hoping that this will lay to rest any kind of doubts that have been expressed by the state government that they're not getting vaccines, sir. I see here Maharashtra has close to 1.5 million vaccines at hand.
Indeed, indeed. The reports that are coming out is that Maharashtra is got a lot of besetted and besieged with crisis of corruption and crime and this commissioner stuff and all these things. So it seems to be like a very distractionary kind of strategy in terms of complaining. They had three complaints. First, they had no vaccines. Second, they had inadequate allocation. Then third, they have they need more allocation than that has been given. When you actually look at, that's the reason why we are presenting this chart. When you look at the numbers tell a very clear kind of a story. By the way, there's another 80 million vaccines which are waiting in the pipeline, which has been already ordered. So the issue, and I gather talking to people that some of these vaccines are now available for 2,000 to 3,000 rupees in black market. And some of them found this in places like, Andheri and so on and so forth. So it looks like this is another organized crime rather than the real true shortage of vaccines in the country.
And in other global COVID update, a mass vaccine center in Colorado has been shut down after adverse reactions reported to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. This is the first time we are hearing anything adverse about J&J, isn't it, sir?
It is. First time, I think. This is, I think, the Dick Smith, Dick Sporting Goods area, which was used for the vaccines. Whether there's something abnormal, whatever, hygiene, et cetera, we don't know. But clearly that vaccine, because of a huge amount of backlash, the vaccines has been, that those vaccines are being pulled. I mean, that center was shut. Okay. Now, there's not yet been a consequential impact on the specific vaccine itself, whether the vaccine was the problem. But certainly that those who took the vaccine seem to have experienced some abnormal activity. We also reported Michigan. We also reported Maryland, where there was a mix-up in the AstraZeneca kind of vaccines. So these seems to be negligence-related issues rather than the vaccine itself.
And Prime Minister Modi and India discussed the COVID-19 vaccine expansion plan as the cases keep mounting. But more importantly, India is going to have a Tika Utsav, that is a vaccination celebration for the next 3 days from the 11th of April to the 14th of April, where they're going to have a widespread outreach to the people, encouraging them to come take the vaccination shots. So this ought to, bring the numbers up significantly, isn't it, sir?
It should. I think it should. I think we discussed this, and we have. So our word of caution is vaccines are essential, discipline is essential, hygiene is essential, following the protocols is essential, and between first and second vaccine, more care should be taken. Vaccination is not a guarantee that you can violate every kind of a rule. You become a problem until, as they say, herd immunity picks up and gains momentum. Until then, I think much of talking to people across few states, what they're saying is that people have been more negligent in terms of their discipline and habits, which is what is causing the tremendous kind of hike that one sees. In addition to, of course, vaccination has gained momentum. We crossed 2 million one day, we crossed 3 million. India crossed 2 million, India crossed 3 million. I don't know, maybe they will be soon crossing 5 million vaccines in one specific day. So this vaccination is gaining momentum. I think India is not short of vaccines. It's more kind of the political rhetoric. So the message is that while vaccine is essential, hygiene and discipline is equally important to combat this.
And in markets, G20 pledges to make progress on global tax. Your thoughts? Do you think the entire gamut of 20 countries are going to agree that they'll raise taxes?
No, I don't think so. I think that this is just a good platform and endorsing. Welcome, Dr. Janet Yellen. We will hear you out. We'll be sympathetic to you. We'll consider, but recognize that we all have to take into account our own unique investment nuances and needs. So we'll try to harmonize. It'll not be too much of an asymmetric. I just don't see the world going to a social order of homogenization of taxes and investments. Not yet, especially when economies are asymmetric.
And in a study, National Association of Manufacturers says that the Biden tax hikes will cost 1 million jobs in just the first 2 years. And even as that comes down the pipeline, the jobless claims have raised to 744,000, and the number is much worse than expected, sir.
The numbers are much worse than expected. As Republicans rightly said, um, you cannot compensate your way by paying people not to work. Eventually, people have to kind of you can give only so much of go on payment so much, but eventually people have to work. One of the amazing what you call noticeable conspicuous absence is the PPP program. The PPP program, which helps, I would have liked to have seen broad expansion of the PPP program to even one-man companies, two-man companies, three-man companies, and giving them, if you take a PPP program incentive, if you hire two people, then you will get tax concessions for a period of time, or you will get this benefit for a period of time. That could have helped people to get back into kind of work and incentivized people to receive money and then use it appropriately. By just simply giving dole, there is no incentive for these guys to go back to work. So that's why you're seeing some of these numbers that are coming out. 744 is a big number.
Yes, and the Dallas Fed president, Robert Kaplan, says that the interest rates will reach the pre pandemic levels as the economy recovers, whenever that happens. And Jerome Powell says the global economic recovery is still unnerving, and as the pandemic and shutdowns loom around the world, we don't know exactly when that is going to happen, isn't it?
We don't. I think Kaplan is a Dow. So the story is that, so he's a very hawkish. So he's basically trying to, Dallas president, he's basically saying, look, economy is going to ramble. We're going to have a highest growth. Jamie Dimon has stated this deficit funding is going to take the economic boom to 2023. To some extent, you can expect the rates to kind of go up. But having said that, the focused policy of Jerome Powell, which is to say, right, which is we're not going to be vacillating around the interest rate policies, has helped him, and he has been able to keep this interest rate between the 1.6 to 1.7 band. He has not allowed the 1.6, 1.7 band to be breached thus far. So thus far, his stance has kind of paid off. That's number one. When you actually look at the 30-year rates, the 30-year rates is around 2.3. So therefore, still, the rates are very attractive, both for short term. Even a 20-year is around 2.1%. So 1.67%. 2.1%. So between 1.67, 2.1, and 2.3%, the mortgage rates are still very attractive for people who want to kind of finance themselves, or even business rates are fairly kind of stable. So the question is, therefore, when will the rate clock turn? The rate clock at this stage, we don't see this rate clock turning in 2021. The early signs would be probably maybe mid to late 2022 if we continue to see. And he's not focusing on inflation. Jerome Powell is not focusing on inflation, if you recall. He's more focusing on how deep the employment can go to, especially in those long-term unemployment in the aggrieved communities. That seems to be his new scorecard.
And the S&P reaches a new record high as the stock indices finish slightly higher today. Crude is at $59.19 and Bitcoin is hovering around a higher 50,000s. That's all we have for today. This have a great weekend. And before you go, I want to just add one little thing. We should be back on our normal YouTube channel from Monday onwards. We will be able to address a slightly wider audience. Thank you all for supporting us by coming and logging into our B channel on news. Sridharji, we are planning on something over the weekend. We may or may not do it. We will keep you posted. I think, sir, what are your thoughts? Do you think we are going to have a special program this weekend?
I think we will have a special program. We've been discussing a couple of topics potentially, and so this could prop up either tomorrow or Sunday, depending on how the schedule. We'll be there. We'll be back. Yeah.
And as always, have a great weekend. Namaskar, and see you all Monday.
Thank you so much for all your support, and thank you. We look forward to your continued support, and we'll see you probably this weekend.